This week on Our Place, Our Time, a visit with composer Undine Smith Moore and a performance of her work by the Nova Trio. Also, a look at colonial settlements in Virginia through the eyes of archaeologists seeking to preserve them. Now, here's your host, Vianne Webb.
Thank you for joining us. We're honored to have as one of our guests the teacher, pianist, and composer Undine Smith Moore. We'll hear music by Dr. Moore, and Tim Morton will talk with her in her home. Undine Smith Moore once remarked that as a child she was made so aware of her mother's love of reading that she always felt herself afraid of being caught somewhere without a book. Reading has certainly served Dr. Moore well. In her songs, she has set poetry by William Blake, John Milton, Michelangelo, and Langston Hughes. To many people in Hampton Roads, Undine Moore is admired as a great teacher. At Virginia State University, she taught for many years before her retirement, and there she established the Black Music Center, an invaluable musical and cultural resource. She has honorary degrees from the University of Indiana and Virginia State and is a Virginia laureate. Next August, Undine Moore will be 83 years old. Tim Morton went to her home in Petersburg to talk with her.
You grew up in Jarrett, about 20 miles from here. What was it like growing up in Southside Virginia before World War I?
It was splendid. I hear people ask me often in relation to my career as a musician about what it was like to be here. And they ask in a way that suggests that, oh, what a pity. But the truth of the matter is that though I cannot tell how my life would have been affected if I had heard string quartets and symphonies, there is a sense in which Petersburg was a fine place. In the first instance, it seemed to me that at least all the citizens, all the people that I had contact with, thought so highly of music. Mm-hmm. They all wanted to perform, and sometimes you would see perhaps a person walking along the street carrying what was called a music roll, a sort of heavy cardboard forerunner of an attaché case. And when a person like that passed, the feeling would be, well, this is somebody of substance. She's carrying his music. Also, in my assessment of what it was like to grow up here and how it affected the work that I have done, I think that it is very fine to be a part of a community where one's own art is extremely highly regarded, and where the community as a whole is interested in your progress.
You have set several poems by Langston Hughes to
Yes,
music. Did you know him?
Yes, I did.
Tell me about it.
Well, I do not mean that I knew him in his bosom, but I was acquainted with him. He came often here to lecture at this school. He was a close friend of Alston Burley, who was at one time the head of the music department here. And I have in my possession some of Langston Hughes' personal books, one which came to me directly and another that came to me through Alston Burley.
What did Hughes's poems mean to you?
A feeling that has grown in its significance and its joy over the years. I am working at the moment on a setting of his poem that is so widely known. I too am America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen. Yeah. When I work at this, like last night I did, to think how he could at that time have given expression to so many things, but in this particular, it is, I'm not getting on with the work, because you know, if you get too carried away with what you are feeling, you're not going to be an artist. But I have to stop when it comes down to then. I too, I feel, I am happy that I can feel so touched at this age.
You once described yourself as a teacher who composes rather than a composer who teaches. And yet you've composed almost, the way I figure it, nearly 100 works.
Yeah.
What makes you compose? Do you like somebody to ask you to compose things, or do you compose just on your own?
I have always composed. When I was a child, I would not have known to use the word compose, but that is what we had, a piano, and I entertained myself there. And that meant improvising and making up music all the time for the pleasure of it. So that, then of course, when I went to Fisk, I had the formal study that led to composition, and I wrote a good deal of music there as a part of that formal structure.
We're going to hear music by you on this program, a work for trio, piano, violin, and cello, that you called Soweto, after the township in South Africa.
That's right.
Near Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Did you think of the title before you wrote it, or while you were writing it, or how did the title come to you, and why do you think the title came to you?
It's hard in the history of the relationships in South Africa. It's hard to pick out one thing because it has all been so horrible and so disturbed. But there was an occasion when the police and the officials fired into a group, and 22 persons, young people, were killed. What was a crowning insult was the fact that when the people wished to bury the persons that had been murdered, they were not permitted to bury their dead. And I guess everybody was affected by it, and so was I. And I knew I had to do this piece, a commission, but I hadn't decided what I was doing. I was waiting for my subconscious to help me out. Well, one morning, without a word of warning, quite early, I heard the word Soweto, and I sat up, straight up in bed, astonished to think, isn't that something, what has been going on all the time? And so I thought that was just, isn't that something? So oh, that's what my piece will be. And of course it will be many other things, and I'm not going to be trying to tell the whole story, but that's it.
With us to perform music by Dr. Moore is the Nova Trio, which commissioned and first performed the work we'll hear. Dr. Moore composed it less than a year ago. It confirms that at age 82, she's a lady of remarkable energy. The music is called Soweto, after the township in South Africa. Virginians have always valued their history, but we are risking today losing artifacts from our past which can return to us valuable lessons. We're building highways and housing developments over historical sites. Fortunately, we're identifying and saving some of these. Don Jeffries visited 4 places in Hampton Roads where archaeologists are learning more about the early years of the colonial settlement in America.
Because this is the area of first settlement in Virginia, with the founding of Jamestown in 1607 and the spread of settlement out from Jamestown throughout Virginia, we obviously have more archaeological and historical sites in this area. It's an incredibly rich archaeological area.
But therein lies a dilemma. Much of that rich historical treasure is in danger of being bulldozed out of existence, and each site lost slams a door on our colonial heritage. Of particular interest are those 17th century sites which can add to our meager knowledge of the first 100 years of settlement following Jamestown. Nicholas Lucchetti, senior archaeologist for the James River Institute of Archaeology, explains how cooperative citizens are helping save a few such sites.
A number of barrel wells were noticed by the landowner, this is Susan Westcott, at low tide. And she went down and examined them and, in fact, retrieved this late 17th century copper mug from one of the wells. She, in turn, notified the state archaeologists who determined the significance of the site, and all of that prompted a professional rescue excavation of the Church Neck well site, which has proved to be a very significant site because a number of the wells, of which there were 9, had parts of shoes, a number of shoes dating to the 17th century, and we think that the site represents a shoemaking tanning industry on the Eastern Shore during the second half of the 17th century. Another good example of how the community has helped to save a site that's threatened by development is in the city of Suffolk at a site we call the Woodward Jones site, which is significant because it had the earliest example of a one-room house that survived in Virginia, which would have been typical of a larger part of the population than many studies focus on. A lot of archaeology, a lot of historical studies focus on. So through the efforts of the landowner, Dr. Lloyd March, and the Nansemond Suffolk Historical Society, who raised a large amount of money to undertake a proper archaeological excavation of this site so that when we're finished, the development can proceed without the loss of any historical or archaeological information.
Located at the confluence of the Appomattox and James Rivers, the old Hopewell Airport is one of the richest archaeological sites in Virginia. The owners of Jordan on the James allowed preliminary excavation of some of the sites prior to construction, but there is still much work to be done.
Within this 167-acre point of land is a woodland Indian village. There is also a major settlement that dates from the earliest period of colonization in Virginia history, called a site called Jordan's Journey, which was established in 1619. There is a late 17th century farmstead and a major 18th century plantation at Jordan's Point.
Lucchetti says it will require a decade or longer to acquire the information still hidden in the multiple sites at Jordan's Point. If a 5-acre parcel of land containing the 3 principal sites can be acquired, he will set up research projects inviting colleges and universities to participate, training archaeologists while securing knowledge of our forebears. Meanwhile, the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, the APVA, has been protecting our historical heritage since 1889. One of the most important is Bacon's Castle, the earliest and perhaps the only surviving 17th century house in Virginia. Nick Lucchetti.
Through the APVA and the Garden Club of Virginia, a research excavation was conducted of what has proved to be the only surviving intact garden in 17th century Virginia, and in fact is the earliest preserved garden plan in North America. What is so spectacular about it is that the planting beds survive. There are 6 large rectangular planting beds in the core of the garden that are about 70 feet wide and almost 98 feet long. The walkways survive, white sand walkways which crisscross the garden are still there. And much to our surprise, garden buildings or at least the foundations of these buildings, survive on the perimeter of the garden. And so with all of these sites, we're just accumulating more information and learning about how people lived during the first 100 years in Virginia.
The other side of the archaeological effort is the preservation and interpretation of artifacts found on the various sites. At the James River Institute for Archaeology, that responsibility belongs to Beverly Straub.
For me, the real excitement and the thrill is working in the lab, because for the first time in 200-300 years, you're seeing these objects that were thrown away or lost by someone, and it's really exciting to do that. Terry Barton here is working on some of our artifacts that we have retrieved from the Woodward Jones site. All the artifacts come in from the field in a paper bag with their numbers. In this case, it's the city of Suffolk, SK, and this is the 147th site in Suffolk. And the rest of the numbers tell us exactly where on that site these artifacts were found. After washing, they're numbered, as Terry's doing, and mended together. Most of the artifacts, the ceramics especially, that we find are fragmentary, but in some cases we're able to mend these fragments together, as in this example of an English slipware dish. From one of the church neck wells, we recovered fragments of a shoe as sketched here, which footwear specialist Al Segudo helped us to identify and conserve, and we were able to put the shoe together. Here it is. It's a child's shoe. Stylistically, it dates to the first quarter of the 17th century, and as far as we know, it is the most complete, earliest excavated shoe found in North America. This is where we store some of the material from the Bland farmstead. It was occupied from the 17th through the 18th century, as shown by this chronology of wine bottles. This wine bottle, which dates to the fourth quarter of the 17th century, has the seal of Francis Poythress on it. You can see here an FP. He was a statesman, very active in Jamestown in the 17th century. This is an 18th century bottle. It bears the seal of Richard Bland, who was very active politically in the activities leading up to the Revolutionary War. Usually, we just find fragments of wine bottles, and we're lucky if we're able to mend them together, as in this case. This bottle was pieced together from many fragments. But occasionally we do find complete bottles, these two are an example of complete bottles which were found on the floor of the cellar, and they date to the first quarter of the 18th century.
We like to think that these sites don't belong to the individuals whose property they happen to be on, or to the archaeologists who happen to excavate them, but they belong to all Virginians because this is a part of their heritage. Of course, the ultimate goal of all of this work is to present it back to the public.
number of independent video producers are plying their trade in Hampton Roads. Yorktown's Tim Ivey of iVideo Productions is one of them. We'll leave you now with a look at winter in our place as seen by Tim Ivey, and hope that you'll join us again next week.